Here's what I want to do. I want to talk about both what's going on right now, what are the current economic conditions going on right now, what the policy responses have been to the healthcare crisis, and then try to talk, at least with the data that we have, what's going on specifically in Hawaii, and then try to forecast forward what economists and business analysts, finance analysts think the economy will look like in the near future. And then at that point, at least initiate a little bit of the discussion of how is this healthcare crisis identifying problems that potentially exist in today's Hawaii economy. Like, what is the structure? How is that economy particularly suffering from the healthcare crisis? That then Dr. Itoga can then take it from there and discuss a little bit about the opportunity that's presented to us to rethink how that economy looks. Okay, let me try to get rid of all of these. Okay. I wanted to start off first with this picture. So a lot of these are what I would consider here data vignettes. In other words, I'm trying to use the picture to discuss a larger topic. And here specifically, I want to look at car loans. A pretty boring looking thing. And this is what the data has generally looked like for individuals being 90 days delinquent, meaning you haven't paid your auto loans for the past 3 months. Doesn't mean you're not going to pay it at all, but generally speaking, that's about the time that under normal conditions, that the tow truck's pulling up to your driveway and pulling your car away. Right now, so this data here, this came from January, and this data was showing that the amount was at about 5%. It's actually increased about 50% in the past 30 days. So it's now at 7.5%. So that means that approximately 1 out of every $13 in auto loans is now not going to be collected by the bank. So why is that important to someone like myself? What it seems to signify here is that auto loans are one of the few types of loan products out there that did not get the forbearance. So student loans, right? If you have a student loan, you're not having to pay that off right away. Mortgages, you got a forbearance. Credit cards, you got a forbearance. Almost everything is getting a forbearance, meaning forgiveness, not forgiveness, but you can pay late. They're getting that automatically. But auto loans did not. And when we think about how people then decide what are they going to be able to pay, even if they're not paying all of these other things where they owe money, and now they're not paying their car loan, and usually the car loan is one of the more important things that people try not to avoid paying. If that's already at 7.5% and we're just a month into this, it's probably a pretty significant sign that household finances are facing problems. Now, if only to highlight this data vignette a little bit further, the rumor on the street right now is that the auto rental companies like Hertz is going to declare bankruptcy this week or next week. And so obviously that's someone with a very big set of auto loans. And the question really is, what are banks going to do? They're not going to really want these cars back because the used car market has too many cars. So why is all this important here? Let's just look at production. The solid green line here shows the level of production up through 2020. And you start to see here, as you can kind of see with my mouse here, these two dashed lines start to deviate quite significantly. And what this is saying is that even if we recover very quickly from this healthcare crisis, people are still scared. And so because people are still scared, that people will start to save more. It's our natural response to scary times. And so because people are saving more, that means they're not spending more. And what that means is that even if everything works out just great, just the fact that people became more scared means that about 1.5 years from now, we're still going to be $500 billion smaller as an economy, even if everything recovers completely back to normal. Just because we were scared, we're going to be about $500 billion off in the economy. And again, we're about a $20 trillion, $21 trillion economy. Now, what about prices? So economists care about production, prices, and unemployment. We looked at production, prices. We actually see a decline here, that prices have declined about 0.1%. Before you think that that's a great thing, that's actually a really bad thing. The last time we had a significant decrease in prices was during the was in 2010 during the Great Recession, and the time before that was the Great Depression. So we certainly know that something bad is going to be happening, and prices going down is a bad thing because what it does is it consumers start to slow down their spending. Firms start to not create so much inventory, which means production is down, unemployment goes up, people stop spending as much money as they were before. And we see this here, that when we look at the unemployment levels, so this one's a little bit harder. The numbers are coming out all the time, but if we look at this, that JP Morgan, at least as a investment firm, estimates that the unemployment rate could reach 20% in the month of April. That's about the more extreme numbers I've seen. I think most economists right now are settling on about 12 to 13%, which would still be as high as we've ever measured. We started measuring unemployment formally in 1947. And the highest we'd ever received was, I think, 1980 or 1981. And then in the peak of the Great Recession in 2009 or 2010, we were at about 10.1%. So this would be historically high. Economists think that the unemployment rate was about 25% during the Great Depression, but that's not really I'm not sure how trustworthy that number is, because most people during the Great Depression weren't even bothering to look for work, and you have to be looking for work to be considered unemployed. So this is showing that 1 in 5 people are actually hopeful that something is out there for them, at least in the month of April. And then here in Hawaii, it's actually the highest. The unemployment is not evenly spread across the country, whereas we have almost always had the lowest unemployment levels. I think it was about 2%, even as late as February. It's now close to about 37%, so about 1 in 3 workers being unemployed in Hawaii, which, you know, as you look at this geographical distribution, we are beyond the range. The range goes to 78 and we were at 79. So we exceeded. So the question then is, what do we do? What is the reaction to this? There's 2 ways economists understand we can approach this. One would be that the government spends more money. That would be fiscal policy. Or the alternative is that the central bank, in our case, the Federal Reserve, increases the money supply. Increasing the money supply, what that does is it lowers the interest rate. And if you lower the interest rate, then people spend more money. So those are the 2 approaches. When we look at fiscal policy, this one gets a lot of the news because it's makes good headlines. Most of us got our stimulus payments. If you're on unemployment, you're getting an extra $600 that's coming from the federal government. There are food stamps, there's the small business money, there's aid to hospitals. West Oahu, I think the number I saw was received about $1.4 million to be given to students and for infrastructure expenses. Airlines, Hawaiian Airlines got money. Everyone's getting money. Everyone's getting money. The federal government spending money to stimulate the economy. Now, it's unprecedented the amount that we have as a federal government going out. It's actually, since I made this chart, it's actually $2.2 trillion now. But what that means is that that's about 10% of the GDP of total production going out. It's double what it was in the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, 2008, 2009. Double. We've spent double the amount of money. So either as a government, we're feeling more generous, or the significance of what's going to happen and hasn't really happened yet, at least that we don't see it happening yet, is going to be more significant than the Great Recession. And so then the other approach is that the central banks spend more money, and the central bank spending more money looks, or increasing money supply looks like buying all debt it possibly can. And it buys that debt by printing the money. And unless you're a technical economist, basically you'd see lots of the words here on the bullet point saying debt, meaning it's buying other people's borrowed money. It's basically financing their things. The most important thing here would be the fourth bullet point. That would be, or third and fourth bullet point, corporate bonds. The Federal Reserve has never bought corporate bonds. And it's not just investment grade, but it's also, I guess the nice term to put it, what we would call on Wall Street would be fallen angels. But it just means that your balance sheet has become significantly worse very quickly. Here in Hawaii, unemployment numbers going up. What we have basically available to us are initial claims, people filing for it. This data is really not that trustworthy because there have been problems in processing that we probably have all heard about. And you have to be successfully processed to be measured here. So I'm not sure what faith I give to those numbers. The production numbers, we only have to about March. So these numbers aren't that good either, but what we can see is that we're obviously deviating from the past. But here's where things get, I think, exciting, but also a little bit more dangerous to think about would be, what does the recovery look like? Is it shaped like a V, a U, an L, or is it something that's led by the US and inflation? Let me just say something very briefly about each of these, just to keep my eye on the time here. There's the equity markets and the bond markets put about a 35% probability on a V-shaped recovery. What that would mean is that we're now in the bottom part of the V, or going towards the bottom part of the V, that basically the virus doesn't come back. We did just enough to stimulate the economy and not too much. And that the expectation is that by June of 2021, we would be back to where we were before. It basically says that everything goes just right and we go up just as quickly as we went down. And that, again, by June of 2021, everything is fine. For whatever reason, I'm not necessarily of believing that, but about 35% probability. 35% probability also on a U-shaped recovery. You can see that obviously the bottom of the U is a little bit longer, which basically means maybe we have a second recurrence of Corona, or maybe Chinese customers don't come back as quickly as we thought they would. Maybe we have a few minor mishaps and a few big bankruptcies, but eventually we recover. And the idea is that by the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, we finally recover. Again, Wall Street again puts about a 35% probability on that. So now we're at about 70. There's about a 20% probability on an L-shaped recovery. That would mean that we're down and we just kind of lagger down for a very long time, and we just struggle and struggle to ever recover. So that would be kind of like Great Depression style recovery, right? Which only got resolved, by fighting a war, which is not a good solution to recovering the economy. About 10% probability, this is actually the worst case scenario. So if you thought L was bad, this is actually the worst. What the last scenario says is that actually the virus wasn't that big a deal. Let's say that we solve it. Let's say that someone comes up with a vaccine tomorrow. That would actually be very, 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 from an economist perspective, let me just preface that a whole bunch here. From an economist perspective, if a vaccine came out tomorrow, that would be a very, very, very bad thing. Because what would happen is that we stimulated the economy, as we saw with fiscal policy and monetary policy. We stimulated the economy through all this money out there, And now with a vaccine, everyone's going to spend the money, which would then cause significant debilitating inflation, the likes of which we haven't had since the 1970s. And then just to kind of conclude here on what does the future look like, you see these are kind of the ranges that, here this is Bank of New York Mellon. What you can see here with the band is this is what all the analysts kind of think of where we're going to be. I think they're kind of hopeful if they're saying that the mean is going to be about 2%, because that would be historically about the same. I tend to think we'll be a little bit on the lower range, but that's just me. The dark line here is if we were a V-shaped recovery. Prices were generally going to be very low. And then the federal funds rate. So what this is the general interest rate. There's about a 1 in 4 chance that the interest rate will be below 0% by the end of the year, which is actually a bad thing if you're an economist, because what that means is that we are no longer, our bonds, our debt that we're issuing as a US government, the only reason people are buying it right now worldwide is because we're one of the few countries that offer a positive interest rate on our debt. Everywhere else around the world, it's negative. So it's about 1 in 4 chance we're going to lose that title. But if anything, interest rates are probably not going up anytime soon. This is my last slide then. If we're at the point where in our current, in Hawaii, where about $1 in $4 is on tourism, and obviously we've been greatly affected, severely affected by this virus, what it does is it makes us have to start to rethink, even if the United States is going bad or globally things are going bad, how do we use this as an opportunity to rethink how we designed our tourism-based economy, which kind of just, I mean, I'm sure there's experts out there who would tell us more about how we actually fell into our tourism military duopoly as controlling the economy. Everything else we've tried to do since then, like version 2.1, 2.1a, have just been kind of like add-ons to this. But maybe what COVID does for us is the opportunity is makes us think about something else, something that Dr. Itoga can talk about.
Do you want to see if there's any questions?
Sure. Does anyone want to ask questions of me right now or oh, wait, let's see. Yes. Okay, so we have a question here. How will college students graduating into the crisis economically? Those who graduate during, will it be like those who graduated during the financial crisis of 2008? Excellent question. To keep it very brief, this recession is so much different than the recession we faced in 2008, 2009. As a small story here, I had a student in 2008 that graduated. She got a job. What was it with? It was with one of the banks. She got hired on a Monday and laid off on a Tuesday. So she worked for 1 full day. The problem there as a crisis, because that's really what 2008, 2009 was, a financial crisis, a liquidity crisis, which then meant because the entire sector of the economy was destroyed, the economy had no hope of even becoming a V or a U. We at least have a hope of becoming a V or a U. And people on Wall Street at least think more likely than not it'll be a V or a U. So in those cases, if we believe that it'll be a V or a U, then those who are graduating in May, this coming month, it probably won't be that bad if we're talking like September or October, right? You're not going to find the job right away. And it's probably not going to be in tourism or hospitality. But, right, we do know that there's enough stimulus out there in terms of fiscal monetary policy that firms are still going to hire once we start to recover. And it shouldn't be as severe as it was in 2008, 2009, unless it's an L or US-led inflation. We have a second question here. I'll talk very briefly about it. Aggressive government spending on essential goods such as masks and collateral effects on Hawaii, privatization of goods, outsourcing dangerous. Yeah. This is, this is now where it gets a little bit about what your political beliefs are. So the question comment was, what is the government's role / responsibility in terms of buying protective equipment, masks? To what extent should the government try to privatize some of these things? To what extent does it even have a role in incentivizing people to spend money? This is kind of hard, right? Because it goes, and that's why I generally don't have an interest in politics in general, because what happens is that whereas I like the data and I like the binary nature of either right or wrong to that, in terms of politics, it really comes down to, do we think that the government has a responsibility to buy masks? Personally, I think so, but I'm sure some people think that everyone should just do things on their own. I think that if the government has to decide what to spend, if the government wants to spend a lot of money, for instance, food stamps are a great way of stimulating the economy, because the grocery store wins that you're buying it from. You could have some debate about whether people should buy things from Walmart, right, which is owned, right, obviously on the mainland, versus maybe something like Times or something along those lines, or buying masks again would help, right? Mask producers, and also keeps us healthy and stops a second outbreak. Buying ventilators, probably investing in college infrastructure, hospital infrastructure, all those are good things. I think the problems start to come into when the government spends money on what they say are small businesses, but then when we found out that like Ruth Chris's Steakhouse is asking for the same money, then things get really tough, right? Because now, how small is small? How big is big? It's hard to really say. Okay, just on the basis of time, other people can add comments if they want to add them from mine, but I want to turn it over to Dr. Itoga to talk about hers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tom, for that amazing presentation, or Dr. Scheiding for that amazing presentation on the economics of what is happening with all of this. And I know you've heard from our other healthcare professionals at our university too. And I actually, even though Professor Scheiding ended with the question, I'm gonna start with one of the questions that I saw. And is there gonna be tourism after coronavirus? 100% yes. The tourism industry is coming back. It will happen. The only thing is I don't know when. So that's something that has yet to be seen. I don't have the answers to that, but what I do have is the COVID pivot. Okay, so I just want to share quickly this little video that okay, you guys, that is Waikiki Beach as of right now, or as of 2 days ago it was. 10,424,995. That number represents the Hawaii visitors in 2019. Before the pandemic affected not just Hawaii, not just the US, but the world, what we were grappling with in Hawaii was, how are we going to sustain the amount of tourists that were coming to Hawaii? That was our big issue. If you don't remember the news articles, is more and more tourists coming? Can our resources manage it? Can do we have the hotels? Do we have the room space? What kind of impact are they making on the environment? And that's what we were dealing with. I want you to just briefly, I'm not the economist here, but I just want to briefly share with you this graph. I want you to see this money spot right here. This is 1989. This was the peak. This was, I would say, the glory year of Hawaii tourism, where the spending was high and the visitors were around 6 to 7 million visitors. And those 6 to 7 million visitors brought in more money than the 10.5 million visitors. The Department of Economic, DBED, projects is that for 2020, there was supposed to be a 1.2% growth in visitor arrivals. And the Hawaii Tourism Authority reported a dip in visitor spending by over 2%. So the trajectory we were going on was even more visitors coming to Hawaii, but spending even less money. So more tourists and spending less money. This was what was the big news. This was the data. This is what, researchers and industry professionals were meeting with the government to talk about how are we going to manage all of this. Another part of over-tourism, as residents, do you live here, you are part of Hawaii. And On the Track, one of the big research organizations, in their most recent study from September to November of 2019, it was the absolute lowest level where only 50% of Hawaii's residents saw the benefits that tourism brought. And now, it'd be interesting to take that survey exactly this moment, because I think we can all feel the effects of not having tourism and have our tourism economy shut down completely. But some of the things that, we as residents complained about was it caused traffic, it increased prices, there was overcrowding, the cost of mountains and trampling our sacred grounds and doing so much damage to the environment. So just the amount of tourism and the over-tourism was really an issue for Hawaii. Okay, now we have the coronavirus travel restrictions, and now we need to pivot. We literally have no tourism in Hawaii. And now our issue is actually unemployment and employment rate country based on the percentage of people working here, and our tourism industry is literally devastated. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but it's just interesting to think about, a couple months ago, these were issues, and now of having so many tourists come to Hawaii, now we have virtually hardly any tourists. For example, in the month of March last year, 864,000 tourists came, and now I think about 3,600 tourists came. So if you can even imagine that kind of impact that we had on our environment here in Hawaii. Our problems are that our tourism industry has shut down, and we don't have the jobs. Things to come, and that are the good things that at least we can focus on for this. And Hawaii, oh my gosh, we're so lucky. We live on islands, and we've been able to shut off tourism, enforce that quarantine. So we've been social distancing. I know personally from talking to my classes, honestly, the students have been amazing. They've been staying at home. They've been working hard on their papers and presentations, and it's working. From the news reports that we've heard, Hawaii has virtually flattened the curve. Even though it's not over, this is a really exciting time and something that Hawaii and the residents should be proud of that we've been able to do. Okay, it's almost like the universe heard what was happening, not just here in Hawaii, but around the world. But especially I'm going to focus on Hawaii, and it's giving us a chance to breathe again. Our Hanauma Bay is coming back to life. The whales are having a rest. The environment, if you guys have been out and about in appropriate legal ways, you can actually see the change and the difference that is happening in Hawaii in the environment as just walking along, going out into the water. Honestly, the other day I was surfing in Waikiki, and a flying fish literally landed on my surfboard. I don't remember the last time I saw that much wildlife in Waikiki, which is usually overrun by, all the amounts of people that are in Waikiki. But don't get me wrong, there's still tons of people in the lineup and surfing, but you can find parking, which is amazing. So it's been a really exciting time for us as residents, so I hope that we've been taking advantage of these natural resources that, we contribute to and we are a part of and we take care of in many ways. The second thing now I want to talk about, or not the second thing, but the next thing I want to talk about is what are some of the things that can happen during this time. I'm not going to talk about the policies and the economic, or the policies and government and things and health. I think there's so many other experts that can cover that. But some of the things that I've been talking to some people in the hospitality industry, and I have one friend who said, this comes from the owners and the operators. And here's where your little hospitality and tourism or hospitality administration lesson comes in. And as you know, for the students who are taking this as their major, that and operated by the same people. So back in the day, yes, the Kelly family owned the hotels and operated the outrigger hotels. But nowadays we have a lot of people that are sharing, that are operating the hotels from the mainland, like some of these big corporations that we see here, and the owners could even be on the mainland, like the Blackstones, or in Asia, the Kyoyas, who own the beachfront property and things like that. So what we can really see, and I want to give an example of, this is White Sands Hotel, and this is from the Surfjack Hotel, and a local kid, Ben Rafter, he was the president of Aqua Hotels and Resorts, and now he's running OLS. And he is a part of the movement that is getting the owner-operated hotels fired up about the change and, implementing, like bringing back the community, bringing back local. Surfjack has, the powwow, the artist, the local artist, Matt Tapia. It has Ed Kenny cooking in the restaurant or implementing the restaurant. It has local designer Vanguard Theory putting it all together, bringing in, local designers for their wallpaper, for their paintings, for everything. So it's a really exciting time within the revitalization of Waikiki's hotel industry. So from the operators' point, these bigger operators, if we can, encourage change that some of these smaller hotels are making, and that they're now implementing, more local design, more being a part of the community, and we can see that in Waikiki and how the landscape is changing. So hopefully the Hyatts, the Marriotts, the Hiltons, the Four Seasons, and the Wyndham operators will all start seeing how important the community is and involving this. Another example is the hotel that OLS operates, Hotel Renew. It's in between Aston Waikiki and Marriott Waikiki on the beach. It's a smaller hotel, but it's supposed to be it is a wellness hotel, and they focus on mind, body, and spirit. And so on top of being able to do, the yoga and the to change, where you can not just, if you want to come back on vacation and on top of going sailing or taking your surfing lessons, you can also be a part of the restoration of He'ia State Park, before or after do your kayaking and paddleboarding. And then you have your hike in Manoa Falls. And then you can learn about the invasive species and help with that, of the removal of those plants. And at Kapiolani Park, you can have the meditation, you can do the yoga, and make a small donation to the homeless programs that we do have in Hawaii. So there's exciting things that these hotels are doing. And as, for the students who are going to be going into the hospitality industry, who do you want to work for? Who do you want to be a part of? Like, what values are important to you? And of course, as consumers, for us, what matters to us? Do we just want the cheapest deal, or do we want to be a part of something? I think especially what matter, and I hope especially at this time they make that a priority. Okay, on top of the hotels in Hawaii, I want to talk about, we have all these corporations, we have what's happening, and Hawaiian Airlines and Disney, which I know you guys love, so I'm so happy to be able to talk about it in this capacity. Even the Hawaiian Airlines is a publicly traded company, so it's owned by the shareholders. The headquarters are based in Hawaii, and it is the largest employer of public companies in Hawaii. And so as of, I know it's at least over 10,000 employees, that a lot of them, yes, are not stationed in Hawaii, but the majority livelihoods for people in Hawaii. And it's just, when we consider flying other airlines, we also consider flying Hawaiian because we relate to it. It's local. We might see our friend or our auntie working on it, but we also know how much Hawaii does to contribute back, and the profits come back into Hawaii. Now, I know Disney, if you think about it, is a complete opposite. But when I think about Disney and when I think about Aulani Hotel, I think about you, the students who are working there, or my friends driving in from Hawaii Kai to work at Aulani Hotel, because they take. But thank you. So sorry about that. I hope you heard all the wonderful things I had to say about Aulani and Hawaiian Airlines and how it contributes to our community and our culture, and how thankful we are to have companies that not only provide jobs and economy and a way of living, but we also have companies that can, contribute back to our economy. Okay, thank you. To our culture and our community. Okay, we're almost finished anyways. Okay, Frank Haas, who is the former VP of Marketing at Hawaii Tourism Authority and the former Dean of KCC's Hospitality Tourism Program. I want to quote him exactly on what he says, and this was in an article, I think, in the Star Bulletin or KITV, and he says, the tourism industry should focus on micro markets. He's criticized tourism leaders who concentrated only on arrival numbers, saying the industry should focus on bringing a smaller volume of high-spending tourists and improve tourist experiences. We need to have tourism be what it should be, which is a contributor to economy and a contributor to quality of life. We need to have an active management plan that's not just on HTA and that's not just on the government agencies. I think it's also on you. It's you as, the workforce that's going to enter into the hospitality tourism market, and it's you as consumers in making these decisions. When I came to Hawaii, moved back home in 2016, I went to the Global Tourism Summit. And the last session I went to as part of the Native Hawaiian Hospitality Council was on it was on bringing back like local tourism, and they had representatives from the Native American Tourism Association Alaska, in Australia and the Aboriginals, and in New Zealand with the Maori culture too. They got up on their panel and they looked directly at the Hawaii tourism leaders and said, you are selling Hawaii too cheap. You're literally giving everything away. And I don't want to go into say that Hawaii is only supposed to be for the rich or the elitists, but we have a responsibility as residents, as workers, as, voting, voting for our leaders in Hawaii, that what is important to us in Hawaii, and our resources are our greatest gift. Our resources, our aloha, all the things that we're able to give away for free, but we need to give it away responsibly, right? So when we're collecting that whole park and recreation or hiking trails, it keeps our beaches clean and things like that. We have those issues by not having taxation on the Airbnb and all the other rentals and things like that. So those are things that we need to take into consideration about what is the appropriate thing as Hawaii tourism moves to the future. Right now, we have the chance to pivot. We have the chance to put forth hotel plans that implement, working with the community, whether it be with food movements, whether it be with protecting their environment, whether it be with helping our community and the homeless or any of the others. We have a chance to make a difference with what happens and to help our government agencies, to help Hawaii tourism, to help our employers that we're working for, and help our consumer purchases that we make in the next few months and the next year or so. What are we going to choose right now? Are we going to choose to, prioritize our resources, our land, our water, our earth, our wind, everything that we have? So this is what we can do right now. One of the things that I want to mention, I know we're a little bit running out of time, but is that wellness, with the combination of Hawaii being low in coronavirus cases and then having our clean air, our drinkable water. I mean, it is such a paradise here in Hawaii. And to have the chance to pivot in our marketing class, we talked, how can Hawaii remarket itself? How can we charge that premium on what we have? Wellness is one of those ways. The Four Seasons Resort, it used to be Kuali Lodge, and now it's a wellness resort, Sensei Lanai. I think position to reopen. I actually just saw Lanai had their first case of coronavirus. I'm not sure, but before yesterday, I think they had no cases of coronavirus. But even more so, people are going to be able to pay that premium to, especially with coronavirus. We all remember how important health is. And so come to Hawaii, rejuvenate, be a part of the environment, breathe the clean air, and drink the clean water. And that's what Hawaii has to offer. And that's how we can pivot our tourism industry, we can pivot our marketing, we can pivot what's happening in Hawaii. This is just one of the ways. There's so many millions of ways to do it. This is just one of the ways I'm sharing with you guys right now. And I know maybe for you guys are considering what you can do right now, this moment, while you're sitting at home and finishing all your papers and projects and professors are doing all their grading, what else can we do? Just like we saw after 2001 and September 11th, and after we saw Hurricane Iniki and how we've seen the economic in 2008, how that's affected, we can reconcentrate on our economy and we can start with us. Of course, you've been seeing all of these buy local support, and but have you been to the farmers markets? That is local. They are literally working and growing and bringing this amazing fresh clean produce to you. So I hope you've been going out to your local markets. Not just that, as owners or of small businesses or working for these corporations, or even for ourselves, for our family, is there a local company first that's selling something that we maybe could buy instead and buy from them instead of ordering it from the mainland first or from internationally? So that's something that you guys can definitely consider. The next thing is hire local. not just thinking about like, oh, okay, I'm not the boss yet, but how can we train ourselves as local residents and educate ourselves and spend this time, while tourism is not happening exactly, but how can we improve our local economy, our local hires, so that they can become more competitive, and that we can competitive so they can hire us here locally, so we can provide this back for our families and our jobs and for the people here. The next big thing that I think is going to happen with our tourism economy is staying local. I think when we first opened the hotels again, we, the Kama'aina, are going to be the ones who are going to be able to get there quickly. We don't have to get on an airplane, but instead of jetting off, to a new place, and I'm sure some of you guys are, wary of travel, but some of you guys maybe are a little bit excited to travel. But staying local, having that Kama'aina rate, supporting, the local hotels that are going on. It's safe to travel and be in Hawaii. Our hotels have opened up, they've cleaned, they've sanitized, they have, correct procedures in place. I think that, you guys will start posting online, and, the social media will spread out, and more people will see how great it is, to come back to Hawaii and stay in Hawaii, and, and what a good job that we've been doing here in this while we've been on pause, and, how our environment has rejuvenated and things. So just to recap, I think we all are thankful for and realize the impact that the tourism economy makes, even though a lot of us have had like the, sentiment about the over tourism. I mean, myself included, not being able to find parking at any of the beaches that I grew up at, and being thankful that, and remembering how much tourism contributes back to our economy. And number two, making those decisions to support what do you really believe in, like not just, thinking about like what's the best deal, what's the cheapest, even though I know we're trying to survive and sometimes that's the choices we have to make. But, if we do have the opportunity to see who's selling local, who's what the company's beliefs, what else they support, that's another thing to think about. The third thing, of course, is like, let's not sell Hawaii short, like this, we are worth, our environment, all of these things are worth so much. So taxation on the right, revenue income streams that come in that support the programs and the government programs that support our resources, I think is so important. And on our last side is, of course, buy, hire, stay local, and most importantly, take this time to enjoy Hawaii. Be the tourist, go out there appropriately, and social distance and do all the things like legally, don't do anything crazy. But this is really the chance for us to really experience Hawaii and, remember why we love it and what we're working for and what we're working for to support and, keep our economy going, and remember why we're here and how thankful we are. This is from Adventures of Jess, the Instagram account. I'm just gonna, we're gonna end with that.
So the question we have here was, are there any other sectors in Hawaii that can capitalize to diversify its economy besides tourism and agriculture? I'm gonna start. Or do you want, I don't, there's not, gosh, I moved here in 2015. I'm coming into this from the perspective of an outsider. And so, I mean, I hear of all these anecdotes of industries that are trying to get to position themselves here in Hawaii, like manufacturing, right? That there used to be some manufacturing here, and then there's all these attempts to recapture manufacturing. There's a person over in Hawaii Kai that's running an ETF, an exchange traded fund. Like, that high finance would be here in Hawaii is also a little difficult because the markets are closed by 10 a.m. So, sometimes you hear these little anecdotes of other industries emerging, but I think in some sense, agriculture and tourism those were the natural sorts of industries for Hawaii. And from an economist perspective, sometimes it's a good thing to say, let's find something else. But I think, as Dr. Atoga kind of points out as well, maybe we just need to embrace the fact that these are our industries, but then make them work for us. So one of the things that economists sometimes think about when we think about, an example would be the country of the Ivory Coast. So the Ivory Coast, what they're known for is they make a lot of chocolate and coffee. That's just what they're from an environmental temperate perspective, that's what they're good at doing. They're good at growing it. Mongolia, the country I do research on, good at getting coal out of the ground and selling it. Even a country like Canada, our US largest trading partner, good at cutting down trees and selling us the lumber. When a country has a vast natural resource, sometimes you would think that's really good if you're a developing country, because then you can sell that thing and become a big, good growing economy. But most of the time it doesn't work out that way, which is what economists call the natural resource curse, that it actually hurts that economy from growing, because then they develop their entire economy around exporting lumber or exporting chocolate, or in the Middle East, exporting oil. And then something happens and all of a sudden you lose that sector in your economy. Or you get politicians and an infrastructure that's only designed for that one thing and not for the other. I mean, right, that could be somewhat the critique that one could make about us in Hawaii, that we've organized ourselves around this one thing and now we're suffering the consequences. But again, as this kind of the title of this presentation, again, we can pivot to something else using the same infrastructure. We don't have to go anti-tourism or anti-agriculture, but again, make those two work for us better, or even find, again, some hybrid between the two. I don't know if you want to add something to that, or...
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see, just even looking at our UH programs and seeing what our government is investing in is basically what is being supported at UH. So even as Professor Scheiding said, our film industry, and as you know, at UH West Oahu, we have a very strong cybersecurity and IT program that's growing. So those are the things that I think are starting to develop more and more, and becoming a place of importance with our creative media department here, and looking at the other campuses, especially Manoa, the strength in their research on medical, and how even the role that they're playing with, the coronavirus, as well as, their cancer research and their programs that they have. If we are going to pivot, and as Tom said, I like that very amicable way of saying, not to turn away from Hawaii tourism and agriculture, but to look how we can bring it together and strengthen it along with these other, I would say, fringe industries that can grow. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I just want to end on a small story though, about a pivot. And I asked her permission. She said it was okay. So one of my students, JC Ige, and if you know Ige's, it is the catering company for a lot of our funeral. We have it at parties and weddings and celebrations. The graduation season, she said, is the biggest season for her. And I was like, okay, how much? She's like, I don't know, but it's a lot. It's the most of their money. So anywhere, I'm thinking from 60 to 80%. And it is gone. Every single catering order obviously is canceled, since all graduation parties, everything, the family gatherings, they're all canceled right now. So her main source of income has gone away, and her takeout was a very small portion. So thanks with one of her other, her capstone professors, I know, with developing her marketing plan, and she pivoted and went back to her strengths, where her sister had completed culinary school. They brought back some of those specialty things that Ige's does, with their banana cream pudding, their furikake snacks, their large meals and their large catering meals for family. And she started marketing on social media. She looked at all different types, and had just implemented bento sales and take-home kits for your family, and they're busier than they ever were. I don't know how we can all get back into the kitchen, rearrange things, and move to what is our strengths and our former strengths, and push forward what has a higher profit margin than the other items in our economy does. But if that's what the Hawaii government can really take the time to look at, I think this can be our pivot and really have the chance to put forward what's best for Hawaii, not just in the short term, but in the long term, and sustain Hawaii's economy through these measures, and take this time. We've never had a time where you can just reset and implement new.
Yep. We have another question here. What precautions are we going to take if this happens again in the future? A different approach as a county or as a country, or even in Hawaii as a whole. I mean, I think the concern now, right, if we talk about, again, forecasting VUs and other kinds of things, one of the things to consider is, what have we done to fundamentally change our infrastructure based on this pandemic? Because we've had other false pandemics where we didn't do anything to change things, right? So swine flu, Ebola, things that happened elsewhere. Sometimes hospitals did prepare for it, then it didn't happen. And so then right in this kind of continual push for efficiency and lean inventories and whatnot, hospitals didn't order as much. Businesses, even the government didn't stock like ventilators and masks and everything. So I would like to think that maybe we will prepare better, and that we'll spend the money to do this again. But I think if history is any guide in my just general pessimism about the world, though, too, I mean, I think we're going to talk about this a lot right now, but 15, 20 years from now, we're not going to be thinking about it or remembering, or in this case, maybe our like old great grandfathers are laughing at us because they could talk to us about the Spanish flu or something like that. Right, that we didn't learn the lessons from their day. I mean, the other example would be H1N1 virus when it affected Hong Kong in the 1950s. I mean, if you look at the numbers infected or fatality rates, they were huge, right? And you look at countries in East Asia that prepare well, it's because some of these previous iterations are occurring on a more frequent basis. I guess the question would be, when do we think there will be another virus at some point? When will the other one come, I guess? Okay, we have a question for Holly here.
Hotel, we've been seeing news stories about tourists regularly defying self-quarantine rules, so hotels that have a responsibility, yes, sure those guests are following local quarantine mandates. So this is purely a policy question, but so I can only offer it in the terms of my personal opinion, is that I think the hotels are responsible for up to a certain limit. I don't think that that is their entire responsibility, but I think it would be unfair of the hotels to put that entirely on the police or whoever else is enforcing it, but to actually support government in as much as they can to regulate what the hotel guests are doing. It's a really crazy.
So I mean, I'll move over closer to your microphone. So there was this interesting article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that was talking about Airbnb, and that things were so good the previous 2 years, 3 years, that people had been buying like 5, 6, 7 units, and they were renting out all these units. Then Airbnb and that they all changed their refund policy, so everyone canceled. Now the Airbnb owners have to refund the money, right? That the company told them they have to. They're doing somewhat of a pivot where they're saying, okay, we're going to start renting things out long term. We're going to start to downsize how many properties we own. Maybe we're not going to do this ever again. Right, but also too, it would come down to part of my even trepidation with staying at an Airbnb property always is, I don't know, I kind of like the homogenization and standardization of these properties, but we would imagine that's actually going to be lost, right? Because if I stay at a Marriott in New York City versus one in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, that's going to be a very different experience where, again, when you're talking about owners versus operators, I'm actually kind of relying on the operator to be following the right procedures. And some operators are obviously going to be better than other operators that adhere to the right policies.
Yeah.
How could this pandemic change travelers' habits? The brief one I will talk about, which was also in the Wall Street Journal, I think last week, was actually talking about the bigger thing is going to be the conferences and exhibits. So the big exhibition that was canceled in Vegas was I think it was called ConCam or something. It was about construction. I think everything about construction. Huge exhibit, all in Vegas, all canceled, right? And you think about all of us, many of us, at least even myself, have all had conferences canceled. And right then you're getting 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people all in the same set of hotels, all coming together. We have we have Democratic, Republican national conventions either canceled or delayed or maybe going virtual. What that does is it creates are we going to change how things are? Are we just going to take a pause in how things are? I mean, there's a part of me which just says it's in human nature. Once we have a vaccine, we're going to go back to our perilous ways, and we'll start all touching doorknobs and touching each other's faces all over again. You know, but again, there's also a part of me though too, which does say that, you know, and I think about what fundamentally changed from the 2009 crisis to today, right? What did 2009 start to create within all of us, right? There was a lot of ways in which we actually did become more entrepreneurial after 2009. If you look at the firms that emerged after 2009, Airbnb being one of them, right? Uber, Lyft, right? That there's this whole sharing economy, which sometimes gets denigrated, but at the same time, it emerged out of a kind of a lean time of the 2008, 2009 crisis. I'd like to think as well that, right, on a different level, whereas these are kind of lean times, these are also different times where we're rethinking travel, how close we get to each other. You know, maybe it'll rethink that, but also too, you know, the fact that we're all that we should be all wearing masks now, whereas in my wife was telling me that right in like Vietnam and everything, the masks are, if you know that you're sick, you put a mask on, and we just don't have that habit here. We're all kind of reliant on people saying, I'm sick, don't get too close to me. But maybe even at a minimum, maybe we'll at least all wear masks in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, to answer Lauren and Xiaoyu's both about like how this travel is going to be changed, I think just especially looking at the example of Taiwan that went through SARS and went through, you know, the bird flu epidemic, and seeing how that they have lived through that and have still, you know, come back. And so having coronavirus hit Taiwan, they were really able to be prepared. They already had a lot of those safety precautions in place. They already, like, you know, Dr. Scheiding said, of wearing masks and, you know, having hand sanitizer everywhere and getting your temperature checked as soon as you walk through the airport. And they actually have like packs of like four masks that you can take, you know, if you come into the country. So I think that, you know, our cleanliness habits, even myself included, you know, my habits of washing for that 20 seconds has definitely improved. So I think those positive things, but cleanliness, you know, it's such a special, wonderful, you know, thing that we take for granted. But I think that cleanliness is going to be a premium when we travel with, you know, the right hotels, and even the airlines putting in those implications of being a very clean and safe and, you know, disinfected place. I think those kind of things are going to be really important, and see that, you know, change in not just Hawaii, but our country too. And, you know, when travelers look to travel, you know, there are going to be certain things they're looking for instead.
I think from an economist perspective, I think the only thing that starts to concern me a little bit is, you know, it's kind of natural in a crisis situation, even a healthcare crisis, that, you know, we kind of shut down the borders, close things down, don't buy as much. But when we looked at that very last scenario, the US-led inflation scenario, or even the other letters, not the V, but the U, the L, and the US-led inflation, those are all caused by the extent to which we close off others. Because like it or not, we have a globalized supply chain, one that relies on us all being healthy. When we think, even if COVID-19 had avoided the United States, we probably still would have had a recession, just because our supply chain was so closely linked to the other Asian countries that were suffering from it. There's an extent to which obviously American firms are now reconfiguring their supply chains, doing more manufacturing here, but that can only go so far. And if anything, it causes firms to have less inventory, raise their costs. So if we're talking about change can sometimes be a good thing, but could also be a bad thing. And to kind of, I mean, the globalized supply chain is good, because what it means is that different countries specialize and produce where they're really good at producing those things. And we can denigrate a country, but even if we look at like low labor things, low labor, low cost things aren't even done in China anymore. It's moved long past that, right? And so now it's all in, right? We could look at, like, if you look at all of our shoes, right, 97% I think of all shoes are made abroad. Most of them are not made in China, they're made in Indonesia, right? They're made in Vietnam. And there'll be some other country, I wouldn't say unfortunate, but it's gonna be the launch pad they use to grow to be the next Vietnam, which is actually the fastest growing country in the world, or China, right, which has only finally stopped growing after, I think the last time they had a falling GDP was in the mid 90s. So, I mean, you know, I know it's kind of, you know, wrap yourself in the flag kind of easy to say we should just shut off the rest of the world because of the virus. But I think in terms of change, we should maybe push back a little bit against it and say, how can we make the globalized supply chains safer and still try to pivot to other things? Okay, I think unless there's any other questions, I think we're also out of time. Nope, I think we're over. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you, everyone.
much.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.